I'm Ross Mayfield, investment strategist at Baird, and we are back for another weekly update with our friends at Strategas. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Managing Director and Washington Research Analyst Jeannette Lowe. Jeannette, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ross. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for asking. Obviously, a lot in the policy and politics world to talk about. I think we have to start, as we often have over the last 6 or so months, with tariffs. We know that there was a ruling in the lower court that kind of confirmed that a lot of the tariffs that have been put in place were illegal, but this will likely go up to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, I want to get your take on maybe what you think happens there, and then if a lot of these tariffs have to be rebated or refunded, where does the administration go from there? What does 2026 look like on the tariff front?
Yeah, so just as a quick recap, so back in earlier this summer, we had the Court of International Trade rule against Trump's ability to impose tariffs through the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And then last week on Friday night, we had the US Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit confirm that ruling. But it was a split decision. So it wasn't unanimous, it was 7-4. So there was a little bit more dissent than I think a lot of people were anticipating. Obviously, it will now get appealed up to the Supreme Court. That may happen, could happen in October, could happen in November when they would hold a hearing, and then it could be a couple more months before we actually get a ruling on that. So the bigger question is whether or not there's a stay involved. We anticipate, because it was a split decision, that it's more likely that the stay stays in place, which keeps tariffs where they are. And then we'll look to see what happens with the ultimate decision of the Supreme Court. Because the US Court of Appeals had a split decision, there is a chance that maybe the Supreme Court does rule in the administration's favor and keeps these tariffs in place. But it also there is a strong sway that it could rule against the administration. So, one of the things that they've been watching is whether or not they would require rebates for the tariffs that have currently been in place. And the Court of Appeals kind of pushed that question back to the lower court to look at. And if we go to the Supreme Court too, you see the administration arguing that if these tariffs were to be ruled unlawful, and if there were to be rebates, and then the tariff deals or the trade deals were undone, that would have a really negative impact on the U.S. economy. So you could also see an interesting ruling or a more creative solution on the tariffs, where maybe they're not required to be rebated, but there's some other way that they are allowed to remain in place. But regardless, the one big point that we are trying to focus on is that even if the Supreme Court ultimately rules that these tariffs cannot be in place under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the administration has several other tools that they can use to impose tariffs. So they can use Section 301 authority, which is what they've done to impose tariffs on China. They can use Section 232 authority, which is something that they've done for certain goods like steel and aluminum. They can continue to go after those critical sectors. And then there's another one called balance of payments, which would also allow them to put tariffs in place on a quick relative basis, so they could be in place while they do these larger Section 301 investigations into other countries' unfair trade practices. So bottom line is that our view is that in 1 year from now, you would still have roughly the same amount of tariffs as you have today, even if these current tariffs are ruled unlawful.
I think that's a great takeaway. So maybe a noisy, clunkier process, but ultimately the same destination, and that's important for investors to kind of internalize. I think. Staying kind of in the realm of international politics, the geopolitical situations, a lot of the issues abroad have kind of faded to the background as we've talked a lot about tariffs and the Fed, a lot of domestic politics in focus, but still very important. What are you all watching on the geopolitical front? What do you think is important? What are the big catalysts to keep an eye out over the next couple of months?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting week. So you had over the past couple of weeks the president trying to reach a ceasefire deal in Ukraine, get an end to that war. He had a meeting with Putin in Alaska, and there was hope that there could have been in a meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky to try to move this forward. That progress has now seemed to have stalled. And then on top of that, you see Putin in China standing next to President Xi, standing next to the leader of North Korea. And there's kind of this this you notice a very clear alignment of these countries that have been, somewhat adversaries of the United States, standing together in front of China, holding a very large military parade. And so that's something that I think is going to be frustrating to the president. He wants a ceasefire in Ukraine. The fact that Putin is not making progress, but telling him that he will do so, I think is frustrating him. We could start to see the US try to put more pressure to get that deal done. And then also the fact that you have these leaders of China, North Korea, and Russia all lining up together to kind of, you know, um, stand up against the West and the US's power on the global stage. That could also embolden the president to take more actions against those countries. And so that's something else that we're going to be looking for over the next couple of weeks, just to see if there is some action taken to push forward on getting a peace deal or to kind of cut China off on some critical minerals and things that of that nature that we've been seeing. Chips is something that the US has been trying to restrict to China. So those are things that we're going to be kind of on the lookout for over the next couple of weeks, just to see if there starts to become some more tension. There definitely is a risk of that occurring.
Yeah, and obviously ties into the trade stuff because a lot of the kind of hot war moves into the Cold War, where it becomes critical minerals or supply chains. Very timely stuff, and obviously the president has wanted to keep the price of oil down to keep inflation low. There's an oil premium that could come back into the markets if geopolitics flare back up. So, Jeanette, very timely. This has been super useful. I appreciate your time as always, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Ross.